Hello, welcome back to part 3 of the Introduction to Clinical Governance. And with this part of the lecture, we're going to go through core aspects of the clinical governance framework for Pillar 3, which is risk management. We're going to go through this in quite a lot of detail because this is a very important pillar. It's all about how to keep staff and patients safe, and it's one of the most important pillars, I would say. All pharmacists do extra training on this particular pillar. There's the CPPE, which I don't know whether you've heard of, the Centre for Postgraduate Pharmacy Education, which is based at the University of Manchester. There's a lot of training courses for pharmacists, and they do one on risk management, which the last couple of years all pharmacists have been encouraged to do. It's quite a big pack, and it contains a lot of the information that I'm going to present to you now. Okay, so looking at risks. So what is risk management? Well, firstly, you have to know what a hazard is. So as you can see there, a hazard is something that can cause harm, and then a risk is the chance that that hazard will cause harm, and this can be a high risk or it can be a low risk. So if you have a look at the picture on the left, you've got a roller coaster there. So think about what's the most important hazard for this particular shot of the roller coaster. And really one of the biggest hazards is the height of the roller coaster, because you can fall out and die basically. We can't eliminate that risk because the risk is always going to be there, but you can make it a very low risk by managing the risk. So risk management is all about managing risk to change it from being a high risk to a low risk. And in this case, what you might do is get everybody to wear a seatbelt. You might get the roller coaster inspected every day, maybe several times a day while it's functioning, so that it's always safe to operate. And so those are risk management strategies. I'm going to look at some of those for pharmacy. Okay, so here are a whole list of potential areas of high risk in pharmacies. So this is community pharmacies, but can equally apply elsewhere in lots of workplaces actually. So risks to patients we've got first. So health and safety issues, all sorts of things can happen. You can have your patients tripping up in your pharmacy because there might be an uneven floor. Certainly we've had that in one of our pharmacies. One time we had a health and safety problem where a tile fell off the ceiling onto somebody's head while they were waiting for their prescription. So that was a very unusual thing to happen, but again, a health and safety issue. So there's a risk there to patients. There's a risk of poor standards of care and advice. And so if you think about this, one way in which you can manage that risk might be to do some really good training for your staff. And if members of staff aren't able to answer questions, then they need to refer to the pharmacist, who should be trained sufficiently well, hopefully by the time we've finished with you here, and after your pre-reg year, to be able to give the right advice and care to patients. You can also have poor quality medicines or inaccurate equipment, and so the way in which you can manage that risk is to make sure you get your medicines from a good source, and the inaccurate equipment, you might want to make sure that you're calibrating everything. You can have poor service, and this might be rude members of staff who upset your customers. Dispensing errors and prescribing errors, those can happen, and obviously those are big risks to patients and probably the biggest risk that we have in pharmacy. Infection from the pharmacy itself, and this is when if you've not cleaned your pharmacy properly, and that's been a particularly big issue this year during the pandemic, where pharmacy teams have been frantically cleaning everything with bleach diluted to the right concentration, and everybody's been washing their hands all the time and using alcohol gel, using screens in an attempt to keep the possibility of transfer of the coronavirus from the pharmacy to patients, and also from the pharmacy to members of the pharmacy team. So making sure all the surfaces are clean. Another thing is a confidentiality breach. So this is a risk to patients. It's something that does happen. This might be where a patient ends up with a repeat slip going into the wrong bag, so another patient finds out what sort of medicines they're taking, as an example. And then we have safeguarding issues as well. I'm really going to go into this a bit later on. So that's the more complicated issue to deal with. So risks to staff. Again, you've got your health and safety issues. Same sort of things as with patients, but in addition, the equipment that we use to do the service. So you might think about simple things like a step stool. In one of our pharmacies, the step stool was very old, and one of the dispensers fell off it. And then there was an investigation by the Health and Safety Executive, and they actually took that step stool away. They wrapped it up in a plastic bag and removed it from the premises like it was a piece of evidence in a crime scene. And they assessed it and made a decision on whether we were negligent as a company for having allowed that step stool to be there. It was actually the first day that Day Lewis had taken over that pharmacy. We didn't even know that step stool was there, but you have to be very careful about equipment. So financial loss, this is a big risk. So when things go wrong, so maybe your fridge stops working overnight and you lose all the goods in it, there might be £3,000 worth of stock in it. You might lose all of your prescriptions because they get sent at the end of the month up to the pricing bureau and they got lost in transit. So all sorts of things can happen. Disposal of waste. So this is a risk to staff because we receive waste from members of the public, so waste medicines that they don't want. And we also have our own waste in-house, which is stock that's gone out of date or is unwanted. And we have to deal with all of that. And sometimes, certainly when things are returned from members of the public, there can be a risk to this waste because it's not presented to us in a safe way. It might all just be thrown into a plastic bag. There might be cytotoxic chemicals all mixed up with everything else. Maybe if it's a cytotoxic liquid, it could be running down the inside of the bag. And so we have to have special procedures to try and reduce the risks for that and manage that risk. Needle stick injury is when you get jabbed with a needle. And so this can happen during the flu vaccination clinics that we run, and chemical injury also. This could be spillage of acetone, inhaling it. It could be getting chemicals on your hands. It could even include things like methotrexate, which is medicines that we dispense. And then you've got violence in the workplace, and this is something that's quite difficult. It's a risk that is always there to staff. And it's special training is needed to be able to deal with patients when they come in, so that you sort of mitigate that risk to a certain extent. So managing risks. One way to do this is firstly to appoint a clinical governance lead. And this person is somebody that's knowledgeable about clinical governance. They know about other local NHS services, so can signpost to other sources of help if needed. And they also have enough authority to make decisions or report to a person with authority to make decisions on clinical governance issues. And because of that element of this, it's usually the pharmacist who's the clinical governance lead, as they're usually managing the pharmacy. So, as I say, there's going to be lots of systems in place to make sure that we try and manage these risks and bring down the risk from high to low. So thinking about your stock, you want your stock to be the best quality. And so ways in which you can manage the risk of it not being of high quality is to make sure that your stock is always in date. And you do that by doing expiry date checks every 3 months. And that's absolutely everything in the whole pharmacy. That's in the fridge, in the CD cabinet, all of your dispensary stock, everything that's on the shelves in the shop as well. Everything gets date checked because you've got medicines there and they've got expiry dates on them. If you give them out either on prescription or whether you give them out, say if you were giving out medicine that somebody's brought over the counter and it's out of date, then you are in a bad place, and it will be a dispensing error if it's a dispensed medicine. And patients will be very angry with you, especially say, what if it was a mother of a baby that you gave the out-of-date medicine to and they'd fed that to their baby. They're going to be extremely angry with you and very upset and very worried for their baby. So that's a very important routine task that we do in the pharmacies, just to make sure that we keep the integrity of our stock. We also need to buy our stock from reputable pharmaceutical wholesalers, and these will be licensed wholesalers, so inspected by the MRHA. And if you don't use those types of wholesalers, then you're at risk of purchasing medicines that might not be even the right drug. So you would never buy anything off an online source without knowing the integrity of that source, because we don't want to be supplying medicines that are falsified in this country. Okay, so equipment maintenance, very important. So, and this ties in with stock integrity for things that go inside the fridge. You've got to make sure that you monitor your fridge temperatures constantly. And when you were looking at the virtual pharmacy, hopefully you will have seen that we mentioned fridge temperatures, something we do every day. And with Day Lewis, there's a thing flashes up on the computer every morning to tell you to measure all of your fridge temperatures, and people might have 3 or 4 different fridges, and they have to measure the maximum, minimum and current temperatures every day to make sure that everything's in range between 2 to 8 degrees. We also have to recalibrate equipment, and this might be blood pressure monitors, it might be thermometers that we're using for the fridge or for room temperature measurement, or any other piece of equipment, just to make sure that these pieces of equipment that we're using are accurate. And we have to do this in the time frames that the companies that produce the equipment say. So it might be annual, it might be every 3 years, depends on the piece of equipment. And then we also have to make sure that we have the right sort of waste disposal arrangements to reduce risks, because having loads of waste everywhere is a great hazard to the staff and to also to patients, because it contaminates everything. So you have to make sure you've got the right arrangements to get rid of it all in the right way. So for patient returned waste medicines, as I said earlier, there's all sorts of risks from that, because patients just chuck everything into a bag and bring it back to the pharmacy. And so you could get infections if they've brought things back when maybe a patient had MRSA, who knows. Needle stick injuries, because they might have put needles in a bag together with everything else, and believe me, they do. And there could be other chemicals like cytotoxics in there. So we have to have special procedures which are a sort of no-touch technique. So we've got SOPs written on how all the staff have to deal with patient returns so that they don't touch anything. And yet they can sort through the waste, identify what has to go where, and then get rid of it. And again, you saw in the virtual pharmacy the blue and white containers for the pharmaceutical waste, and also you've got your sharps bins for the sharps waste. We also have to have the contracts in place to get rid of all the medicines and the sharps, and have the waste handlers come at appropriate times so that your waste doesn't build up. And we've also got to have all processes and procedures, and everybody has to be trained as to what to do with a needle stick injury. This is something that happens immediately. You need to know that SOP, because you've got to be able to do it immediately to save yourself from harm. So you've got to know what to do. So those SOPs are written, and everybody has to read and sign them. And that's also, you've got procedures for what to do if there's a biological or a chemical spill in the pharmacy, to clean things up to make it safe for staff and for patients. And then you've got a risk of confidential waste being left around as well, and this is something that really has to be handled carefully on a routine basis, of course, because we make confidential waste every day in community pharmacies by producing all the electronic prescriptions which we work to and use as a document to work from, and then the majority of those at the end become waste paper, because we don't send them to the NHS BSA if the patient's age exempt. We need to shred them, and so this then becomes a huge job. The shredding is a massive job. A lot of pharmacies now have a collection by special companies who come and pick up the waste and get rid of it for you with industrial shredders, or they burn it. Okay, so just then to show you, this is one of our expiry date check sheets for the counter medicines. We've got separate ones for dispensary, and every 3 months our staff have to go round and they have to sign against this sheet and date it to say that they have checked all these different sections for dates and removed anything that's getting short dated. And every company should be doing a similar sort of thing. If you haven't signed the sheet, you haven't done it, basically. If you get inspected, the GPHC might want to see your expiry date sheets, and also if anything goes wrong in your pharmacy, say if you give out some medicine that's out of date by mistake, then it may become part of an investigation, and you will have to have this documentation to show that you are doing expiry date checking. So it becomes then very important that you get these signed every 3 months. And then also you can see here, this is an electronic temperature record. As I say, everything's done online with Day Lewis, so we log our temperatures every morning and get it all signed off. So that one's from a bit of a time ago, but yeah, it's all electronic these days for Day Lewis, but not in all pharmacies. So next, I really wanted to show you a video which is it's about health and safety, and really it was just to show you that health and safety applies to all workplaces, so not just to community pharmacies but to absolutely everywhere that you work, and that there is training that you have to go through and things that you need to think about whichever workplace you're in, and just also to then go through afterwards a few examples of things which happen in pharmacies. So this video is on YouTube. I'll put the link at the end so that you can have a look at it if you want to. It's quite fun and it's only 2 minutes long, but I cannot manage to figure out how to do this on this particular video. And this is really just to sort of exemplify that. This is an example of an incident that happened in Reading a few years ago. It was in Topshop in the Oracle Centre, and a boy was killed by a barrier which was put up to sort of get people into a queue, and a terrible incident. So he died just because of this barrier, and this could happen in any workplace. And of course there was a health and safety executive investigation into this, and I don't know whether the company was fined, but anything where there is a death or serious harm to somebody, you will be investigated and the patient can sue you for it. So it's very, very important that you make sure that your pharmacy premises is safe. And so there's lots of things to think about in regard to that. So lots of issues in community pharmacies. There could be a fire. So there could be all of these different things, handling large and heavy objects. So that could be the totes full of medicines, especially if you've got one full of ensured drinks and massively heavy, where you could injure your back picking it up. Slips, trips and falls. So certainly we've had litigation against us in Day Lewis for having a floor that was uneven that somebody tripped over. Things like electrical safety. So you've got electrical equipment, all of your computers, you've got fridges, you've got kettles and toasters and things that people use during lunchtime, and all of those have to be safe. So you need to think about that. Display screen equipment. This is about people using computers all day long in pharmacy. So just standing at the computer doing labels all day isn't necessarily very healthy for that person, that poor dispenser that's doing that. And it's about the strategies that you can use to make sure that when you're using a screen all day, then it's safe for you. There are also issues with handling sharps, talked about needle stick injury, and it's also having very safe practice to make sure that you don't end up with a needle stick injury in the first place. And then thinking about these dangerous chemicals, and I did mention methotrexate before. In all these situations, one of the strategies that you can use is to do training. So we have several management strategies for health and safety. One of them, as I said, is to do lots of safe practice training. And every year we have annual training, which is mandatory on all of the subjects on the previous slide. And this is because these issues are very important. It's something that you need to be reminded about constantly. And it's actually a legal requirement that you do this training. So every workplace you go in, you will be doing similar training, depending on the needs for various sorts of training within your workplace. Other things you can do. So equipment testing. So what that's about, this is your kettles, your computers, they need to be tested for safety every year. And also things like fire extinguishers, so that your fire extinguishers are safe to use and everybody knows how to use them. And you'll get those tested every year, and whoever comes to test them puts a sticker on with a date on it to say that they've done it. So one of the important things we do is risk assessments. And we do these for absolutely everything. So every service that we do, every new service, say whether it's the flu service or any other service, then you do a risk assessment to see what risks there might be. And then have a think about how you're going to control those risks, how you're going to mitigate the risks. And there's an example at the top here. So we do them not only for every service, but also for every person who might be at risk because of who they are. So pregnant women, anybody who has a disability that you're working with, And also during coronavirus, we've had a COVID risk assessment, which we filled in for absolutely every member of staff, and to find out who is more at risk of catching COVID. And so then we can take strategies to make sure that those people work safely. And we also do risk assessments for many of the health and safety issues that come up. One of them is fire, and we have to do a fire risk assessment. And so this is one of our fire risk assessments at the top here, and you can see it's labelled up as hazard, and the first hazard there is cardboard waste. And what's the likelihood of that risk on a scale of 1 to 5? So it's quite high, it's a high risk, and your control measures are keep away from sources of ignition and heat, clear away regularly, and don't allow it to build up, and don't allow anything to block the passageways, and the timescales are immediate and ongoing. So this is a simple way to get people to think about what the hazards are, and then how high the risk is and what you can do to mitigate that risk. So risk assessments are mandatory for all of these health and safety issues, so it's just part of routine working to get them done. And so of course all of those are documented, and we also have to do other documentation as well. So you can see this little green picture in the middle is the accident book, and so we have to document everything that happens with regard to accidents, just in case at some later point in time somebody wants to take us to court about it, and then we've got a record, and this is all part of normal practice for any workplace. Okay, so this is a bit of fun. If you just want to fill this in, just have a look at this picture and see if you can find 10 things where there is some sort of a high risk to working. Okay, so there's probably loads more than 10 in there, but that's just to give you an idea of a place that you would never want to work. So safeguarding is part of risk management, and this really came about because of various incidents that occurred which required some fairly drastic action to make sure that these incidents didn't happen again. And we talked about Harold Shipman in one of the previous parts, in part 1 of the lecture, and so this is Harold Shipman here on the left. And I told you that he was a very well-respected GP who then murdered at least 15, but probably more likely 250 of his patients through administering diamorphine to them. And also we've got events such as the sexual abuse which occurred to young children by Jimmy Savile. So this is Jimmy Savile here with a cigar. So when I was young, he was a very famous guy. He was on TV, everybody loved him, and he used to do a lot of charity work. And he worked with Stoke Mandeville Hospital and raised millions of pounds for them to help them to buy equipment and look after patients. But the staff gave him free rein over the hospital for that, and he could freely wander about with all the patients. The nurses knew that he was abusing these children, and they said nothing. And the reason they said nothing was because he was protected, because he was raising so much money. And that was absolutely wrong. And it was only after his death, which was many years later, he died in his 80s, that all of this came out about how he had abused so many children while they were incapacitated. Maybe they got their legs in traction and whatever with a broken leg, and unable to move, and he sexually abused them in the hospital. So all of those terrible events required some action from the NHS to prevent those sorts of things from happening again. And we also have situations where children or vulnerable adults are being misused or abused in society. And we've had situations where this has happened in a healthcare situation as well as in patients' homes, and things have not been picked up or dealt with in the right way. And I've got a couple of pictures here. The one at the top here is Victoria Clembier, and she was a little girl that was looked after by her auntie and uncle, and they abused her, and she actually died of starvation and hypothermia in her own home, and yet she'd been in hospital, and she was there many times, and it was not picked up that things were not going well at home. She did have social services who were involved in her care, but they didn't deal with it in the right way to prevent her from dying at the hands of her own relatives. And then underneath here, this little boy in the blue jumper is baby Peter, and he was another little boy that was looked after by his mother and her boyfriend, and the boyfriend maltreated that little boy, and he had so many injuries at the point of his death, just multiple injuries. And basically the social services team had not identified this as being caused by the family members, and also the medical team who dealt with the many injuries that he suffered when he was going in and out of hospital. So it's sort of the training that we now receive in community pharmacy, in hospital pharmacy, all nurses, all doctors, is a result of these incidents to try and improve the lives and the chance of picking up these incidents from happening. So we have legislation that came about because of these incidents as well, so child protection and vulnerable adult legislation which we have to follow. We've got safeguarding teams set up over local councils that our pharmacists are trained to interact with if they suspect that anything is going on. And we have to go through extensive training up to a certain level. So pharmacists have to do level 2 training in a community pharmacy. All the other staff members have to do level 1 so that we can identify children or vulnerable adults that may be suffering at the hands of various people who might be maltreating them. And also we have training to prevent ourselves from coming under suspicion of misusing or mistreating patients. So this might be having the training from the GPHC on sexual boundaries, that kind of thing. So just to make sure that you behave in the right way when dealing with patients. So later on in your degree, you'll be getting some of this training at a certain level, and then obviously once you qualify, or sort of quite often during your pre-reg year, you'll be doing the whole NHS safeguarding training to make sure that you're ready to deal with this kind of stuff out in society, because you're in the front line with patients. And this is all part of clinical governance. Okay, another way in which we deal with incidents that have happened in the right way to learn from what's happened and then put actions in place to make sure that things don't happen again is through incident reporting. So this is where you've had incidents happen, maybe with controlled drugs or dispensing errors that have happened, and we have to report things through to the National Reporting and Learning System, which is the NRLS. And you'll learn all about that much more thoroughly with Rosemary Lim, who's going to go through this with you. So this is a system that's in operation in all pharmacies, in hospitals and in community pharmacies. Obviously things do go wrong occasionally, and there are dispensing errors, and we have to deal with it in the right way. So we obviously deal with the patient first and look after them, make sure they're safe. Replace the medicine if we've dispensed something wrongly, we'll replace it with the right medicine, and then we report what's happened to this national system. And the point of it is that we then can learn from these errors. We share what has happened amongst our teams and with the national system so that they can then identify trends and patterns and report things on a larger scale if necessary. So we do the same with near miss reporting as well. So you're going to end up with near misses in your PAMS lessons when you do them. So you're dispensing medicines for people, but it doesn't actually end up going to a patient. So when you're doing it, it's a near miss rather than a dispensing error, and you note down what's happened. You're going to be reporting that for the same reasons, really, so that you can learn from what's happened and make sure you don't do it again, and put actions in place so that it doesn't happen again. And then we take these dispensing errors and also the near misses, and we add them to monthly and annual patient safety reports. And so this is just a sort of an accumulation of everything that's happened in the pharmacy. We also add any other events that have happened to that patient safety report, and this is done monthly and annually so that we can discuss how we're operating, try and improve how we're operating in the pharmacy to prevent events from happening. Significant events and serious incident analysis. So this is an NHS England and Improvement system where anything that's reported to NHS England and Improvement then has to be dealt with in a particular way, and we have to cooperate with this. So significant events are when there's been something happen, usually a dispensing error, where there may or may not have been harm to the patient, but a serious incident is when there has been moderate or serious harm to the patient or a death, and there'll be a very intensive review of what happened with an SI, which is a serious incident. So we just have to cooperate with that and go through the processes of documenting the whole investigation that we set up to find out why the event happened and exactly what happened, why it happened, and then look at what we can put in place to prevent it from happening another time. So you go, as I say, you'll go through that all in detail with Rosemary Lim. Okay, so also timely response to patient safety communications from the National Patient Safety Alerting System and the MHRA. So there are lots of communications that pharmacies receive. Probably every month we get maybe 10, 20 drug recalls. So this is where medicines might have mold growing in them. They might put the wrong medicine into the tablets. All kinds of things happen, and we get alerts for drug recalls, and we have to act on them straight away, and we have to show that we've acted on them by keeping documentation associated with that. And also when any medicine is found to be have more side effects and is going to be withdrawn or anything like that, when there are patient safety alerts set up, then we have to show that we have received that communication and that we've acted upon it. And finally, just thinking about prescribing interventions. So this is where you've had prescribing errors happen. So you've found that the doctor's written up the wrong medicine for a patient, or it might be the wrong dose that they've written up. And we also need to record that we have dealt with that in the right way. We've identified the prescribing error, and we've interacted with the doctor or the other prescriber and corrected things. And we need to document all of this to show that basically we're doing a good job in pharmacy. And so all of those prescribing interventions are also included with the patient safety reports that we write monthly. So there's a whole mass of incident reporting that we do, and this is really just to make sure that everything's documented. It's noted down. If anyone wants to come back to you with if they want to go through the courts with litigation, if you end up with anything happening with your insurers, then everything's documented when things go wrong, and we can learn from it this way. So this is just to show you the near miss error log that you're probably filling in during your PAMs, and just to say that you need to keep these for your not only for filling in during PAMs, make sure you write down all of your near misses, but you'll need to put these into your pad portfolio and keep them, and it will be needed as part of your submission in the third year when you've filled in your pad portfolio 100%. They will want to see your near miss error logs in there, so make sure you fill these in. And these are just some other near miss logs, just so that you know there are other forms out there. So you can see the RPS one at the top, Royal Pharmaceutical Society produce one. This is a paper form that you can fill in, lots of boxes on there to fill in, and then at the bottom here this is our Day Lewis one, which is actually quite based on the RPS one and various other things that we've found to be important in our pharmacies, and people fill this form in on paper when they've made a near miss in the pharmacy. So we found that filling in on paper is the easiest way to get people to do it, and then at the end of the month everybody uploads their data from these paper forms into a program called Pharm Outcomes, and we can then analyse all of the near miss data for the whole of our pharmacies, all 270 of them, and then once we've analysed it, we feed back the data to our pharmacies through a newsletter that we provide every month, so that they can think about how it fits in with their own practice and highlight any problems which keep happening in all of our pharmacies. So this is the dispensing error reports for Day Lewis. Everything's done online, so we've got an online form for reporting dispensing errors and other incidents that happen. And as you can see, we've got where the incident took place, In this second form here, you can see please describe what happened, so you've got to put that in detail, the type of incident, the degree of harm to the patient, and these levels of harm are all set out by the NHS. So you've got no harm, low harm, moderate harm and severe harm and death. Those are the 4 levels. And those are, as I say, it's all defined by the NHS as to what those levels mean. And then how do you think this happened? That's very important. So you have to put down why did this happen, and then also look at actions to prevent. So these forms are designed to link in with the NRLS. So the data is filled in by the pharmacy team at the pharmacy after an error has happened. It comes through to the superintendent's office. We then assess whether any more action needs to be done by the superintendent, such as sending a letter of apology to the patient, and everything's filed. We might need to send the information to our insurers, and then the information goes through automatically anonymised to the NRLS. And this is just to show you what the alerts look like as well. So it's very rare that we get one of these alerts, such as this one on the left here. So this is one of the patient safety alerts that was most recent, sent out in 2020. We don't get many at all, maybe a couple a year. And they're very, very thorough. They're an analysis of something that needs to change and has been recognised as a problem. So in this case, it was the early recognition and treatment of an adrenal crisis in adults, and how this is sometimes missed because people don't realise that patients are on routine steroid treatment, so they need to carry around a steroid emergency card, and a new one has been designed for this purpose. So there's lots of actions as well. So it tells you what the actions are and the time frame that you need to do them by. And this is really for prescribers to make sure they get these cards sent out. Community pharmacies will also have these cards, but we are there to provide them as a backup, but it's the prescriber that needs to give them out to the patient at the start. So yeah, so that's just an example of these alerts. And then recalls, as I say, they're very frequent, and I've got some here from 2020, from November. It's just a couple there, but there were probably about 10 for November. And these are class 2 medicines recalls, and there's 4 levels of recalls. So class 1 have to be done pretty much immediately. It's very urgent and important. Class 2 recalls are also something that has to be done within a narrow window of time, usually within the week, usually within a couple of days. And so there's something wrong with the medicines. If you look at this one at the bottom here, the beta histine one, it says here that there are several batches of finished product were contaminated with theophylline due to a cross-contamination issue identified with an excipient. So obviously they want those tablets to be recalled, and pharmacies have to quarantine those tablets straight away if they've got them on their shelf, and send them back to their wholesaler and get them out of the system basically. And then you've got class 3, which are not quite as urgent, and class 4 level, and class 4 is normally just information rather than a recall. Class 3 sometimes are a recall, but not such an urgent one. And the information would just be maybe there's something missing off a patient information leaflet. So something that you need to be aware of and maybe give information to patients, but not something that's as urgent as the class 1 and class 2 recalls. Okay, so then just to talk quickly about the patient safety report and the pharmacy quality scheme. So the patient safety report done monthly and annually is something that isn't essential for pharmacies to do, but it's not mandatory, but it is something that virtually every pharmacy does. And this is one of the things that we get paid to do as part of the pharmacy quality scheme. So we do it every year. And as you can see here, there's a definition of what we have to do. So we have to provide a written safety report at a premises level, so at the level of an individual pharmacy, which is available for inspection, and it covers analysis of incidents and incident patterns taken from an ongoing log, so that's your near miss logs and your dispensing error reports, evidence of sharing learning locally and nationally, and actions taken in response to national patient safety alerts. So this is a very big document that's written, it's very detailed, and the annual report is the one that we get paid for, but our pharmacies do a monthly report as well, and then amalgamate all of their monthly reports to create an annual report. And then also thinking about how you can make sure that things don't go wrong in the first place. So we do this by writing standard operating procedures. So as you can see here, SOPs are detailed documents describing a routine method to be followed for anything that we're going to do in the pharmacy, and that could be a specific operation, a service, or an action, or anything. So they describe what we do and how we do it. And I'm queen of this for Day Lewis, so I write a lot of SOPs and I keep them all updated. And it's really important for safety because we use these as training documents, so we train our staff on them. It means that everything can be repeated, so it's very reproducible. It means that everybody in our pharmacies do the same thing, and if staff move from one pharmacy to another, they're already trained up and they will know how to work in a safe way because the procedures tell them the safest way to work, and that means that you get a quality service. So it's all about making sure that everything's the same each time and everything's reproducible so that patients receive that quality and safe service. And this is just to sort of give you the analogy of a recipe. So it's pretty similar really. You've got all your instructions for use with Jamie's omelette. If you do it the same each time, it's always going to be coming out as a good omelette. It will be just as good as Jamie's if you use exactly the same ingredients and follow his instructions every time. And that's what SOPs are all about. It's about reproducibility. If you deviate from the procedure, then you could end up with a really nasty omelette, and you could also end up with a very unsafe way of operating in your pharmacy. So SOPs are all about reproducibility. And how we write them, we have to think about all the legal constraints on us in pharmacy. So everything has to be legally correct, and that's particularly important with things like controlled drugs and anywhere where we've got any legal process that we have to follow. So emergency supplies as well, and you'll deal with those in your second year. We have to follow best practice, and so this is thinking about all your GPHC guidance as to how you're going to operate, and also thinking about the medicines ethics and practice maybe from the RPS for all of those legal things that you have to do. And we have to be following current clinical and operational guidelines. So this is thinking about maybe your NICE guidelines that you're going to follow, because some of the SOPs are written according to the way that we do things clinically. And then also thinking they need to be up to date, and all SOPs are updated every 2 years as a minimum, but quite often they get updated much more frequently than that. And particularly during this last year, we've updated masses of our SOPs to do with COVID and how we operate in the pharmacy under the particular conditions that we've got now, thinking about the cleanliness, how we're handling prescriptions, all kinds of things have changed, and the SOPs have changed with it. So as you can see, we use official guidance from the GPHC, the MHRA, NICE, good manufacturing practices, all kinds of things to write these SOPs. And we use SOP templates as well. So the MPA very kindly write quite a number of them, and we might use some of their templates to help to inform the Day Lewis ones, for instance. The PSNC might produce them for various services, and the NHS write them as well for various services that they provide, and that helps us. We may need to amend them according to maybe our computer systems or how we operate with a fine detail in Day Lewis if I'm going to write them for us. But most pharmacy companies have a very similar set of SOPs. And this is just one of ours to show you what they might look like in a pharmacy. So this is one for cold storage. For Day Lewis, SOP 103, we've actually got many of them. And just to show you, it's just a list of what you do, basically, as simple as possible. So point number 1 there, within the pharmacy dispensary, a fridge must be used only for the storage of medication. So that means you can't put your milk in it, you can't put your sandwiches in it. So it's just basically to tell you what to do and how to do it in a list form. At the end of the SOP, you're going to have boxes to sign to say that you have read it and the date that you read it. And that means that everybody in the pharmacy has to sign that, and when the GPHC come around to inspect your pharmacy, they'll want to see it. And with each version of your SOP, you need to put down who the author was, which version it is, version 1, 2, 3 or whatever, and we're up to version 10, 11 on some of ours, the date it was written and when it's next going to be reviewed by. And this is just to show you the vast array that we've got. We're now up to number 204, I think. So they just keep going up and up. We've written a lot this year. And as you can see, they're on all sorts of things. We've got processes for dispensing in there, we've got storage, we've got some clinical ones. Here we are, we've got one particularly for lithium and methotrexate. These are medicines which are high risk, and there are particular protocols that we have to follow, which were originally set up by the MPSA many years ago. And so those get updated regularly. All sorts of things. The supply of insulin is another one where we have to give out particular guidance to patients. We've got a veterinary SOP, and that's something you're going to absolutely love in your second year, doing about veterinary prescriptions. They're a bit different, there are different laws relating to them, and there's an SOP regarding all of that. So they can be on all sorts of things, whether it's processes, new services. So we've got one for NMS, we've got all sorts. There's an SOP for everything in the pharmacy. Okay, so this is a question for you, going back to health and safety. Have a look. Okay, so this is just to see what you can remember. If you can answer that, and then we'll go through the answers to it in the next part.